Hello everyone. In this lecture I am going to talk about the dural venous sinuses. The competency I am going to cover today is AN 30.3 describe dural folds and dural venous sinuses. AN 30.4 describe clinical importance of dural venous sinuses. The objectives are listed here. I want you to go through all these objectives very carefully because all the objectives displayed here will be covered in this lecture today. Let's look at the case scenario here. This patient, a 33-year-old male, comes to the OPD with this presentation. Look at his eye. The left eye. The left eye is pulsating rhythmically. What is the reason for the pulsating eyeball? And what is this condition? What is the anatomical basis for this condition? Thorough knowledge of meninges is a prerequisite for understanding the dural venous sinuses. As we all know, meninges is basically the covering of the central nervous system, and you have the meninges that covers the brain, which is known as the cranial meninges, and the meninges that covers the spinal cord is known as the spinal meninges. The meninges consist of three layers from outside inwards. These layers are dura mater, arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. If you look at the cranial meninges, the dura mater of the cranial meninges has got two layers. The one which is closely adherent to the surface of the bone, which is known as the endostele layer, and the other one is known as the meningeal layer. The dura mater of the cranial meninges has modifications, and these modifications are the falx cerebri, the falx cerebelli, the tentorium cerebelli, and the diaphragm ocelli. So all this has already been discussed in the previous class. So a thorough knowledge is very much important for understanding this class on the dural venous sinuses, since the dural venous sinuses are enclosed between the folds of the dura mater. Now, what are venous sinuses of the dura mater? We know that the deoxygenated blood from the different organs in our body are drained with the help of veins. So veins are blood vessels. They have tunica intima, tunica media, and tunica adventitia. They have walls. They have layers in their walls. In the cranial cavity, the deoxygenated blood is drained with the help of a special arrangement of spaces which are filled with blood, and they are formed between the folds or the layers of the dura mater, known as dural venous sinuses. So the dural venous sinuses are different from veins, but the basic function is the same, that the veins carry the deoxygenated blood away from the tissues, away from the organs, and the dural venous sinuses also carry deoxygenated blood away from the cranial cavity, all the structures within the cranial cavity. But the structure of the dural venous sinuses is different from that of a vein. So basic difference is that the dural venous sinuses are actually larger spaces filled with the venous blood, and this space is formed by the separation and the attachments of the two layers of the dura mater. Now let's look at the characteristic features of the dural venous sinuses. The dural venous sinuses are lined with the endothelium, and they lack muscular coat, and also they do not have any valves. The dural venous sinuses, they collect blood from the brain, meninges, diploe, and also from the internal ear and orbit. And they help in the absorption of the cerebrospinal fluid through the arachnoid granulation tissues. And also the dural venous sinuses receive valveless emissary veins, which help maintain an equilibrium of venous pressure within and outside the skull. Now, how do we classify the dural venous sinuses? The dural venous sinuses are classified into paired and unpaired dural venous sinuses. There are 7 unpaired dural venous sinuses and 8 paired dural venous sinuses. So the number 7 is an odd number, so you can remember. So it is easy to remember. 7 unpaired dural venous sinuses and 8 is an even number. So there are 8 paired dural venous sinuses. So what are the unpaired dural venous sinuses? The superior sagittal sinus, inferior sagittal sinus, straight sinus, occipital sinus, anterior intercavernous sinus, posterior intercavernous sinus, and the basilar venous plexus. So these are the unpaired dural venous sinuses. Now let's see the paired dural venous sinuses. The paired dural venous sinuses, like I mentioned, are 8 in number. So the sinuses are transverse sinus, sigmoid sinus, cavernous sinus, superior petrosal sinus, inferior petrosal sinus, sphenoparietal sinus, petrosquamous sinus, and middle meningeal veins. So these middle meningeal veins are sometimes known as middle meningeal sinuses. They are slightly different from the dural venous sinuses. They are similar. They are similar to the veins. Therefore, middle meningeal veins or middle meningeal vessels. So these are the paired dural venous sinuses. Now let's study the dural venous sinuses in detail. So first of all, let's talk about the unpaired dural venous sinuses. The first unpaired dural venous sinus I am going to talk about is the superior sagittal sinus. The superior sagittal sinus lies within the convex attached margin of the falx cerebri. This sinus begins at the crista galli, a few millimeters behind and above the foramen caecum. On rare occasions, it receives a vein from the nasal cavity if the foramen caecum is patent. As the sinus passes backwards, it gradually increases in size and it lodges in a groove on the vault of the skull. So it is triangular on cross section. On reaching the internal occipital protuberance, the sinus deviates usually to the right side and is continuous with the right transverse sinus. Sometimes it deviates to the left, or it may also bifurcate to terminate in both right and left transverse sinuses. Now let's talk about the confluence of sinuses. This is related to the superior sagittal sinus. So this is also known as the torcula hierophyllae. So it is nothing but the dilated posterior end of a superior sagittal sinus. So this structure lodges in a depression, usually on the right side of the internal occipital protuberance. The right transverse sinus begins from the confluence and it also receives the blood from the occipital sinus. There is a communicating vein which connects the confluence with the left transverse sinus. The interior of the sinus presents our following features. So there are openings of the superior cerebral veins, and also we have arachnoid granulations which project into its interior, mainly for the purpose of absorption of the cerebrospinal fluid. Also we find numerous fibrous bands crossing the inferior angle of the sinus. Apart from this, we find 3 venous lacunae on each side. So they open on each side of the superior sagittal sinus. So what are these venous lacunae? So these venous lacunae are irregular venous spaces which intervene between the 2 layers of the cranial dura, and they are frontal, parietal and occipital in positions. So basically they collect blood from the diploic and meningeal veins, but remember they do not collect any blood from the superior cerebral veins. So these arachnoid granulations sometimes are seen to be projecting into the lacunae. Now what are the tributaries of superior sagittal sinus? So mainly the superior sagittal sinus has got 2 tributaries. The first one is the superior cerebral vein. So about 8 to 12 superior cerebral veins They collect blood from the superolateral and the medial surfaces of the cerebral hemisphere. They drain into the superior sagittal sinus. So these veins course in an oblique direction and forwards and upwards, and finally they open into the sinus against the current of the blood. This is to prevent the collapse of the mouths of the cerebral veins during increased intracranial pressure. The second tributary received by the superior sagittal sinus is the diploic and the emissory veins. They actually pass through they join the superior sagittal sinus through the venous lacunae. Now let's talk about the communications of the superior sagittal sinus. So the superior sagittal sinus basically has three communications. The first communication is with the veins of the scalp, which is through the parietal emissory vein. So rarely there is a vein from the nose which opens into superior sagittal sinus or communicates with the superior sagittal sinus passing through the foramen cecum if it is patent. And also the superior sagittal sinus has a communication with the cavernous sinus, and this communication is through the superior anastomotic vein, also known as the vein of Trollard, and also through superficial middle cerebral veins. So these are the communications of the superior sagittal sinus. Applied aspects of the superior sagittal sinus. So the thrombosis of the superior sagittal sinus is a common example. So it may occur due to spread of infection from the nasal cavity or frontal sinus, scalp, or even from the diplo. So there is marked rise in the intracranial pressure due to interference with the CSF absorption, and also delirium due to congestion of the superior cerebral veins. In infants, the superior sagittal sinus lies underneath the anterior fontanelle. Therefore, the sinus is approached through the anterior fontanelle if other veins are collapsed. The second unpaired dural venous sinus is inferior sagittal sinus. So the inferior sagittal sinus occupies the posterior 2/3 of the lower free margin or the concave margin of the falx cerebri, and this sinus collects blood from the falx cerebri and also from the medial surfaces of the cerebrum, and finally terminates into the straight sinus. The third unpaired dural venous sinus is the straight sinus. It is situated within the junction of the falx cerebri and the tentorium cerebelli. So this sinus begins as a continuation of the inferior sagittal sinus, and it passes backwards and downwards and finally terminates usually into the left transverse sinus. Its terminal part is also connected with the confluence of the sinuses. So remember, the superior sagittal sinus turns to the right and becomes continuous with the transverse sinus. The straight sinus becomes continuous and it turns lateralward and becomes continuous with the left transverse sinuses. What are the tributaries of the straight sinus? The straight sinus has got three main tributaries. The first one is inferior sagittal sinus. So it is basically the continuation of the inferior sagittal sinus. So we can say that the inferior sagittal sinus basically drains into the superior sagittal sinus. And apart from this, we also have few superior cerebellar veins draining into the straight sinus. And a most important vein that drains to the straight sinus is the great cerebral vein of Galen. And this is at the commencement of the straight sinus. So three tributaries: inferior sagittal sinus, a few superior cerebellar veins, and also the great cerebral vein of Galen. Now what is this great cerebral vein of Galen? So the great cerebral vein of Galen is basically formed by the union of two internal cerebral veins, and this vein passes backwards below the splenium of the corpus callosum. So it's one of the parts of the corpus callosum, through the cisterna ambiens, and it receives the basal vein from each side before it terminates into the straight sinus. The termination of the great cerebral vein is guarded by a small body of arachnoid granulation tissue, which basically acts as a ball valve to regulate the formation of the CSF. and basically within the lateral and the third ventricles. So the great cerebral vein and its formation, so more details will be added to this at the time of neuroanatomy lectures. The next unpaired dural venous sinuses is the occipital sinus. So it is the smallest sinus, remember, and it is situated along the attached margin of the falx cerebelli, and it begins as small radicle near the margin of the foramen magnum, and it terminates into the confluence of the sinuses. Anterior and posterior intercavernous sinuses. The anterior and posterior intercavernous sinuses, they traverse respectively along the anterior and posterior attached margins of the diaphragma celli, and they basically connect the cavernous sinuses of both sides with each other. So a circular sinus is basically formed around the sella turcica. So sella turcica is the seat of pituitary gland. The last one of the unpaired dural venous sinuses is the basilar venous plexus. So it is a plexiform venous network and it lies on the clivus of the skull. The clivus is formed by the body of the sphenoid bone with a part of the occipital bone. So as you can see here, so this is the clivus. So the basilar venous plexus basically lies on the clivus. So this plexus connects laterally the inferior petrosal sinus of both sides, and it communicates below through the foramen magnum with the internal vertebral venous plexus. Now let's talk about the paired venous sinuses. So the first paired dural venous sinuses I am going to talk about is the transverse sinus. So each transverse sinus is situated along the posterior attached margin of the tentorium cerebelli, and it lodges in a groove extending from the internal occipital protuberance to the mastoid angle of the parietal bone. The right transverse sinus is usually larger and the left one is therefore smaller. So generally the right transverse sinus begins as a continuation of the superior sagittal sinus already mentioned, and the left transverse sinus extends as a continuation of the straight sinus. At the mastoid angle of the parietal bone, each sinus continues below as the sigmoid sinus. The superior petrosal sinus opens at the junction of the transverse and sigmoidal sinuses. So each transverse sinus presents a gentle curve which is convex upwards. Now what are the tributaries of the transverse sinus? So basically the transverse sinus has got 5 tributaries, and these are superior petrosal sinus, inferior cerebral veins, inferior cerebellar veins, posterior temporal diploic vein, inferior anastomotic vein connecting the transverse sinus with the superficial middle cerebral vein. The second paired dural venous sinus is the sigmoid sinus. So each sigmoid sinus begins, like I already mentioned, as continuation of the transverse sinus, and it leaves the tentorium cerebelli at the mastoid angle of the parietal bone. The sigmoid sinus lodges in an S-shaped groove on the mastoid part of the temporal bone and jugular process of the occipital bone, and it leaves the skull through the posterior compartment of the jugular foramen, where it turns downwards and it is continuous with the superior bulb of the internal jugular vein. So the sigmoid sinus is separated from the posterior wall of the mastoid antrum by a very thin plate of bone, and also intervening is the air cells, mastoid air cells. The transverse and sigmoid sinuses form together what is known as the lateral sinus. So the lateral sinus is transverse sinus and sigmoid sinuses combined. What are the tributaries of the sigmoid sinus? Sigmoid sinus basically has four tributaries. The first one is mastoid emissory vein, which communicates the sigmoid sinus with the posterior auricular vein. The second tributary is condylar emissory vein, which connects the sinus with the suboccipital venous plexus. The last two are cerebellar veins and labyrinthine veins. The applied anatomy of the sigmoid sinus. So basically there is going to be this thrombosis of the sigmoid sinus. It may take place from the infected middle ear or mastoid antrum. This is basically due to the communications. So the thrombosis may extend to the superior sagittal sinus along the lateral sinus, and this may result in impaired drainage of the cerebrospinal fluid, and the resulting condition would be the hydrocephalus. The cavernous sinus. Now we come to the most important of all the dural venous sinuses, the cavernous sinus. So this is important from exam point of view and also from clinical point of view. So what is cavernous sinus? So cavernous sinus basically, like I mentioned, it is a paired sinus, and they are located on each side of the body of the sphenoid bone. And each of these cavernous sinuses, they extend from the superior orbital fissure in front to the apex of the petrous temporal bone behind. The interior of the sinus is found to be traversed by interlacement of reticular fibers, and this makes the sinus spongy in appearance. Therefore, we call it cavernous. The cavernous meaning is spongy. Formation of the cavernous sinus. So how big is the cavernous sinus? The cavernous sinus measures about 2 cm in length and 1 cm in breadth. Each sinus is formed by the separation between the meningeal and the endosteal layers of the dura mater. The sinus, as we know, is filled with the venous blood, and it is covered with the endothelial lining. The roof and the lateral walls are formed by the meningeal layer. According to some authors, the medial wall is also formed by the meningeal layer. The floor and the medial wall are formed by the endosteal layer. So according to some authors, only the floor is formed by the endosteal layer. So there are two concepts. The roof and the lateral walls are formed by the meningeal layer. Floor and the medial walls are formed with the endosteal layer first. The second concept is roof, lateral wall and the medial walls are formed by the meningeal layer, and the floor is formed by the endosteal layer. But I like to mention that the roof and the lateral walls are formed by the meningeal layer, and the floor and the medial walls are formed by the endosteal layer. The roof is formed by the area of the dura mater in front of the crossing of the fixed and the free margins of the tentorium cerebelli, and it is continuous medially with the diaphragm ocelli. The dural roof is pierced by the oculomotor and the trochlear nerves close to the posterior clinoid processes, and by the internal carotid artery at the carotidoclinoid foramen close to the anterior clinoid process. Now, what are the structures passing through the sinus? There are a few structures related to the different walls of the cavernous sinus. So, structures which pass through the sinus or within the sinus. The first structure is the internal carotid artery. This is a very important structure. So, internal carotid artery passes through the cavernous sinus, and it is surrounded by plexus of sympathetic nerves and veins. So this structure, that is the internal carotid artery, enters the cavernous sinus through the apex of the petrous temporal bone, and it passes along the floor of the sinus, lodging in what is called the carotid sulcus of the body of the sphenoid, and later it turns upwards to pierce the roof of the cavernous sinus through the carotidoclinoid foramen. So this is a very important relation of the internal carotid arteries. It's known as the carotid siphon. The second structure that passes through the cavernous sinus is the abducent nerve. The abducent nerve enters below the petrosphenoid ligament, and it accompanies inferolateral to the internal carotid artery. This nerve leaves the cavernous sinus through the superior orbital fissure within the common tendinous ring. Now what are the structures within the lateral wall of the sinus? Within the lateral wall of the sinus, we have basically 4 structures. So the structures from above downwards. The first structure in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus is the oculomotor nerve. The second structure is the trochlear nerve. The third structure is ophthalmic nerve, and the fourth structure is the maxillary nerve. Now let's come back to the oculomotor nerve, which is the first structure in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus. This nerve enters the cavernous sinus by piercing the roof of the sinus, and it leaves the sinus through the tendinous ring by dividing into 2 rami. The second structure, that is the trochlear nerve, enters the sinus just like that of the oculomotor nerve, and it leaves the sinus through the superior orbital fissure outside the tendinous ring. The third structure, that is the ophthalmic nerve, the first division of the trigeminal nerve, it enters the sinus by piercing the cavum trigeminale and also the lateral wall of the sinus, and it leaves the sinus through the superior orbital fissure by dividing into lacrimal, frontal and the nasociliary branches. The formed 2 branches pass outside the tendinous ring, and the third branch lies within the tendinous ring between the 2 rami of the oculomotor nerve. The fourth structure in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus is the maxillary nerve, and this nerve enters just like the ophthalmic nerve, and it leaves the sinus through the foramen rotunda. All these structures, that is the oculomotor, trochlear, ophthalmic, maxillary nerve, or be it the internal carotid artery or the abducens nerve, all these structures are separated from the venous blood by the endothelial lining of the sinus. So the venous blood within the cavernous sinus is not in contact with all these structures, because there is a barrier of endothelium existing between all these structures and the venous blood within the cavernous sinus. This is a very important aspect. Now let's look at the internal carotid artery as it passes through the sinus. Like I already mentioned, the internal carotid artery enters the cavernous sinus through the apex of the petrous temporal bone, and then it passes along the floor of the sinus, lodging in a groove or the sulcus known as the carotid sulcus, which is present on the body of the sphenoid bone. So after a small course in the floor of the cavernous sinus, the internal carotid artery turns upwards, and then it pierces the roof of the sinus through the carotidoclinoid foramen. The second structure passing through the sinus is the abducens nerve. The abducens nerve enters the cavernous sinus below the petrosphenoid ligament, and it is going to accompany the internal carotid artery on its inferolateral aspect. The nerve, after its course within the cavernous sinus, leaves the sinus through the superior orbital fissure, and remember, this structure passes within the common tendinous ring. Now the structures within the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus, I already mentioned these structures. There are 4 such structures which run along the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus. The first structure is the oculomotor nerve, the second one is trochlear nerve, the third one is ophthalmic nerve, and the last one is maxillary nerve. The oculomotor nerve, it enters the cavernous sinus after piercing the roof of the cavernous sinus, and it leaves the sinus through the tendinous ring after dividing into upper and lower divisions. The trochlear nerve enters just like that of the oculomotor nerve, that is by piercing the roof of the sinus, and the nerve leaves the sinus through the superior orbital fissure, and remember, this is outside the tendinous ring. The ophthalmic nerve enters the cavernous sinus by piercing the cavum trigeminal and also the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus, and the ophthalmic nerve leaves the cavernous sinus through the superior orbital fissure, and as it leaves or passes through the superior orbital fissure, it divides into its branches, the lacrimal branch, frontal branch and the nasociliary branches. The first two branches, the lacrimal branch and the frontal branches, they pass outside the tendinous ring, and the nasociliary branch, it passes within the tendinous ring. And this nerve passes the third division, that is the nasociliary nerve. It passes between the two divisions of the oculomotor nerve. The last structure in the lateral wall is the maxillary nerve. So the entry of the maxillary nerve into the cavernous sinus is just like that of the ophthalmic nerve, that is by piercing the lateral wall of the sinus, and it leaves the sinus through the foramen rotundum. Now what is this tendinous ring? You don't have to worry about the tendinous ring at this point. Basically this tendinous ring is found close to the apex of the orbit, and this tendinous ring gives origin to the recti muscle. These recti muscles are superior rectus, inferior rectus, medial rectus and lateral rectus. These are the extraocular muscles, or the muscles that move the eyeball. So the muscles, the recti muscles, basically take their origin from the tendinous ring. So this tendinous ring has a very important relation with the oculomotor nerve, trochlear nerve, ophthalmic nerve, maxillary nerve. Basically they are divisions. Now let's talk about the external relations of the cavernous sinus. So what lies medial to the sinus, what lies superior to the sinus, and what lies lateral to the sinus. So this is what I am going to tell you in this slide. So medially and below, there are two structures related to the cavernous sinus. The first structure is the hypophysis cerebri. What is hypophysis cerebri? It is nothing but the pituitary gland. And the second structure related medially and below to the cavernous sinus is the body of the sphenoid bone containing the air sinuses. So medially and below, two relations. The first one is hypophysis cerebri, nothing but the pituitary gland, and the second relation is the sphenoidal air sinus. Now let's look at the lateral relation of the cavernous sinus. So again there are two structures related lateral to the cavernous sinus. The first one is the cavum trigeminal, which contains the trigeminal ganglion, and this is basically present in the posterior inferior part of the lateral bone. The second structure related lateral to the cavernous sinus is the uncus of the temporal lobe. You don't have to worry about the uncus of the temporal lobe. It is just a small projection of the temporal lobe of the brain. So this is basically related in the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus. So what lies superior to the cavernous sinus? The superior relation of the cavernous sinus is a very important relation. Again, there are two structures related superiorly to the cavernous sinus. The first one is known as the optic chiasma. So the optic chiasma is where the right and left optic nerve, they cross. So a few fibers of the from the right side optic nerve cross to the left side, and similarly fibers from the left side optic nerve cross to the right side. So there is crossing of the fibers, basically the nerve fibers within the optic nerve at the optic chiasma. So this is related superior to the cavernous sinus. So one of the superior relations is a part of the optic chiasma. The second structure that is related superior to the cavernous sinus is the internal carotid artery, as it turns backwards and then upwards after piercing the roof. So the internal carotid artery passes through the sinus, it pierces the roof, and then it passes backwards and then upward. So this course of the internal carotid artery within and above the sinus, it describes a somewhat U-shaped or somewhat S-shaped loop. This is known as the carotid siphon. So this is the superior relation of the cavernous sinus. So the relations of the cavernous sinus medially and above, hypophysis cerebri, sphenoidal air sinuses. So two structures. Lateral relations are again two structures, cavum trigeminal and uncus of the temporal bone. The superior relation again two structures, a part of the optic chiasma and the internal carotid artery, describing a backward and upward somewhat U-shaped loop known as the carotid siphon. The other relations of the cavernous sinuses are superiorly optic tract, optic chiasma, olfactory tract, internal carotid artery and anterior perforated substance. Inferior relation is foramen lacerum and the junction of the body and the greater wing of the sphenoid bone. Medially, like I already mentioned in the previous slide, there is going to be the hypophysis cerebri and the sphenoidal air sinus. Laterally, there is temporal lobe with the uncus. Below and laterally, there is mandibular nerve. Anteriorly, there is superior orbital fissure and the apex of the orbit, and posteriorly there is the apex of the petrous temporal and the crus cerebri of the midbrain. Now, this is an important aspect of the cavernous sinus, the tributaries of the cavernous sinus. The cavernous sinus has nearly about 7, or it can have even more tributaries. We have nearly 7 named tributaries of the cavernous sinus. So what are these tributaries? So they are, the first one is superior ophthalmic vein, second one is a branch from the inferior ophthalmic vein. Sometimes it receives a communication from the central vein of the retina, so that's the third tributary. And the fourth tributary is superficial middle cerebral vein, and fifth tributary is a few inferior cerebral veins. The sixth tributary is sphenoparietal sinus, and the seventh tributary is sometimes found, and that is the anterior trunk or the frontal trunk of the middle meningeal vein. So these are the important tributaries of the cavernous sinus. Now, what are the communications of the cavernous sinus? So the cavernous sinus has various communications. So it receives venous blood through its tributaries, and these tributaries communicate the cavernous sinus with other nearby areas. So basically there are a number of communications of the cavernous sinus. This is very important as an infection can run in either way. So knowing the communications of cavernous sinuses clinically is very, very important. So let's look at the communications. The first communication is with the transverse sinus, and the communication with the transverse sinus is through the superior petrosal sinus. And the second communication is with the internal jugular vein, and this communication is through the inferior petrosal sinus and also a plexus of veins that runs around the internal carotid artery. The third communication is with the pterygoid venous plexus, and this communication is through the emissory veins which pass through the foramen ovale, foramen spinosum, foramen vesalii and foramen lacerum. So there is an important communication of the cavernous sinus. The fourth communication is with the facial vein, and there are two routes which communicate the cavernous sinus with the facial vein. The first route is through the superior ophthalmic vein and the angular veins. The second route is the pterygoid venous plexus and the deep facial vein. So through these two routes, the cavernous sinus communicates with the facial vein. Now the fifth communication is with the opposite cavernous sinus via the anterior and the posterior intercavernous sinus. And the sixth communication is with the superior sagittal sinus, and this communication is through the superficial middle cerebral vein and also the superior anastomotic vein. What are the factors which regulate the flow of blood within the cavernous sinus? Basically, the flow of blood within the cavernous sinus is regulated by the expansile pulsation of the internal carotid artery. See, expansile pulsation of the internal carotid artery. Now, you can correlate this point I just mentioned with a condition that we discussed in the case scenario. The patient comes to the OPD with a pulsatile eyeball. So that is known as pulsatile exophthalmos. So in his case, there has been a rupture following maybe an injury to the skull. So the wall of the internal carotid artery has ruptured and it has blended with the cavernous sinus. So the wall that separates the cavernous sinus and the internal carotid artery is merely the endothelium and the walls, of course, of the internal carotid artery. So there has been a rupture of the internal carotid artery, and therefore the internal carotid artery, so it's a arterial component, so it has rhythmic contraction. So this has ruptured and it has opened into the cavernous sinus, and this cavernous sinus has a communication from the orbit coming through the ophthalmic veins. So the carotid artery, as it pulsates, so this pulsation is picked up by the cavernous sinus, and through the ophthalmic vein it goes into the eyeball. So eyeball also pulsates, and this is known as the pulsating exophthalmos, or there need not be exophthalmosis, but the eyeball can be seen pulsating very clearly. So the factors regulating blood flow within the cavernous sinus, one of the factors is the pulsatile or the expansile pulsation of the internal carotid artery, and this is by gravity and also by the change of the position of the head. What is the development of the cavernous sinus? I will just mention very briefly, because this is anyways going to be covered in embryology. So the development of the cavernous sinus is from the cephalic part of the primary head wing, which lies rostral. Basically, it is the rostral continuation of the anterior cardinal vein. So the incorporation of the plexiform tributaries during the development of the sinus makes the interior of the cavernous sinus trabeculated. Applied anatomy of the cavernous sinus. So the first example is cavernous sinus thrombosis. So this occurs usually from the infection, for example, an infected pimple on the dangerous area of the face. The effects of the thrombosis are, there is exophthalmos, or also known as the proptosis, due to the engorgement of the ophthalmic veins. Papilledema due to engorgement of central vein of the retina. There is also paralysis of the extraocular muscles, which is known as the ophthalmoplegia. This is due to the involvement of the oculomotor, trochlear and the abducent nerves. There is also dilated and fixed pupil due to injury to the parasympathetic fibers for sphincter pupillae inside the oculomotor nerve. And sometimes ptosis is also observed due to the injury of the oculomotor nerve, which supplies the levator palpebrae superioris. And also sensory disturbances in the areas of ophthalmic and maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve is also observed. This is a case of pulsating exophthalmos. So pulsating exophthalmos is due to an abnormal communication between the cavernous sinus and the internal carotid artery. So this is known as the arteriovenous fistula. The eyeball is protruded, known as the exophthalmos, and the conjunctival blood vessels are actually dilated. The eyeball pulsates synchronously with the arterial pulse. The patient complains of rumbling sound in the orbit. The venous congestion leads to what is known as the papilledema, and also it can result in impaired vision. The fourth paired dural venous sinus I am going to talk about is the superior petrosal sinus. The superior petrosal sinus basically conveys blood from the cavernous sinus to the transverse sinus. So each sinus lodges in a groove along the upper border of the petrous part of the temporal bone, and it is situated in the lateral attached border of the tentorium cerebelli. Close to the apex of the petrous temporal bone, each sinus crosses above the trigeminal nerve. Now, what are the tributaries of superior petrosal sinus? There are basically three tributaries. The first one is inferior cerebral veins. The second tributary is from the cerebellum through some cerebellar veins. And the third tributary is from the tympanic cavity through veins from the tympanic cavity. The fifth paired dural venous sinus is the inferior petrosal sinus. So each of these sinus drains the cavernous sinus into the superior bulb of the internal jugular vein, and this sinus lodges in a groove along the articulation between the petrous temporal and the basic occiput. And this sinus leaves the cranial cavity through the anterior compartment of the jugular foramen, and remember, it is the first tributary of the internal jugular vein. Now, what are the tributaries of inferior petrosal sinus? There are two tributaries. The first one is the labyrinthine veins, which drain blood from the cochlear canaliculus and the aqueduct of vestibule. The second tributary is veins from the medulla, pons, and the cerebellum. Applied anatomy of inferior petrosal sinus. So, thrombosis of the inferior petrosal sinus may occur from the infection of the middle ear and the internal ear. So, this may be associated with the ipsilateral involvement of trigeminal and the abducens nerves. So, this condition is known as the Grade-Negos syndrome. The Grade-Negos syndrome is a triad symptom involving the middle ear infection known as the otitis media and the facial pain and abducens palsy. So this triad symptom is known as the Grade-Negos syndrome. So this is usually due to the infection in the petrous temporal bone. Coming to the sphenoparietal sinus. The sphenoparietal sinuses are situated along the undersurface of the posterior border of the lesser wings of the sphenoid bone, and they drain directly into the cavernous sinus. So each of these sphenoparietal sinuses receive occasionally the frontal trunk of the middle meningeal vein and also anterior temporal diploic veins. The petrosquamous sinus. The petrosquamous sinuses are not usually present. When they are present, they lodge along the petrosquamous fissure and they drain into the transverse sinuses. So anteriorly, each sinus communicates with the retromandibular vein through the postglenoid of the squamous foramen. The middle meningeal veins, also known as the middle meningeal sinuses, these are very important clinically. So the middle meningeal veins, they basically accompany the branches of the middle meningeal artery, and they consist of frontal, also known as the anterior, and the parietal, also known as the posterior trunks. So both the trunks communicate above with the superior sagittal sinus through the venous laculum, which already we studied this. The frontal trunk terminates into the pterygoid venous plexus through the foramen ovale or into the sphenoparietal or cavernous sinus. The parietal trunk ends in the pterygoid venous plexus through the foramen spinosum. Applied anatomy of the middle meningeal vein. You know the middle meningeal artery from infratemporal fossa and also from the meninges. Apart from this, I wanted to, in addition to this, in fact, I want you to know that the middle meningeal veins are closer to the bone than the arteries. And these veins basically cause grooves on the inside of the parietal bones. And therefore, it is very much understood that in fractures involving the parietal bones, these vessels are very likely to be damaged. Since these vessels lie outside the dura mater, the rupture of these vessels, they cause accumulation of blood in the extradural space. That's known as the hematoma, extradural hematoma. And as this blood goes on collecting, the pressure on the brain tissue goes on increasing and may lead to irreversible damages. So this is very important aspect of the middle meningeal artery and the associated middle meningeal vein, which we also call as the middle meningeal sinuses. So the important concept here is the middle meningeal veins are closer to the bone than the arteries, and the bone that is very much related to is the parietal bone. So in the fractures involving the parietal bone, middle meningeal veins are very much likely to be damaged, and the hematoma, and the blood collects, blood clot, a hematoma, let's call it hematoma. It collects in the interval between the scalp and the meninges, and as it increases in size due to collection of more and more blood, it applies pressure on the brain tissue, which may compromise some of the blood vessels by the brain tissue by compressing some minute vessels, resulting in irreversible damage. So rupture of middle meningeal vein resulting in hematoma is not good. To summarize, the dural venous sinuses are found within the cranial cavity enclosed between the two layers of dura mater, They are similar to the veins in the fact that they carry deoxygenated blood, but unlike veins, since they lack muscular wall and the valves. There are totally 24 dural venous sinuses, out of which 8 are paired and 7 are unpaired. The cavernous sinus is very important from exam point of view as well as clinically. So you are required to know the location, extent, formation, relation, content, tributaries, communications and applied aspects of the cavernous sinus with suitable diagram. Thank you very much for the patience.